programs at the Northern Virginia Family Services based in Manassas, Virginia. Her program deals with families and is a nice mixture of suburban and some rural elements, so we'll have a good perspective from that, and also with some high-cost area and some more affordable areas, so there'll be a nice blend. And then Vivian Wan, who's the Associate Director of Abode Services, Allied Housing, and HIP in Alameda, California. Obviously a very high-cost area, low vacancy, but also with a little bit mix of an urban, suburban, and perhaps even a touch of a rural area. So hopefully with these two tremendous presenters, you will be able to get a great perspective. Allow me to give a brief overview of the core components. They were developed in January of this year. We worked with several federal agencies to come up with what the core components would be for rapid rehousing. The purpose is to really help organizations and agencies distinguish a true rapid rehousing strategy from programs that might be similar but not have all the core elements of rapid rehousing. These core components have been endorsed by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, both major funders of rapid rehousing, and also the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. There are three core components. The first one is housing identification, which includes landlord recruitment, addressing potential barriers, and assisting households linked to appropriate housing. That's the one we're going to be talking about today. There's also one on rent and move-in assistance, which is primarily the financial assistance provided to households. And then rapid rehousing case management and services, which, as you can see here, consist of several different elements. We will be covering this one in our February webinar in more detail. You can also find the core components on our website at this address. You can also just go to our main website, endhomelessness.org, and click on the rapid rehousing slide that's up on the top. And on that page, you'll find a box that will link you directly to the core components. Today's focus is going to be on housing identification, and I'm very pleased to now turn it over to Gwen McQueenie. Gwen?
Hi everyone. Like Stuart said, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where everybody's located. I am the Deputy Director of Shelter and Rapid Rehousing for Northern Virginia Family Service here in Manassas, Virginia. And I'm going to give you guys just a little bit of background about our program, just so you're kind of aware and can put it into kind of a frame of where we've come from once we started our rapid rehousing program. So in 2009, Northern Virginia Family Service merged with Serve Inc., and at that time we had a 60-bed shelter. And it was a really true old-fashioned shelter model that people stayed from anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And oftentimes our clients, would leave just because they had kind of come to kind of a max and would go into the community. We wouldn't know where they were going, and there was a very high rate of recidivism. Oftentimes clients, families, singles came back to our shelter seeking more services and again would stay for a period of time. Next slide. So in 2012, we had an opportunity actually to go from 60 beds to 92 beds with a project of an organization in our area, Homemade. And it was a great project so that we could serve more families and larger families to extend our beds. And at that time, we really, everything was changing. We were, really looking at how we were going to become a rapid rehousing program and what kind of different elements that would be for us. And I just want to say that I think, both Vivian and I and other presenters, with different things that you're listening to, some things may not fit exactly for you, but hopefully you're going to get some great ideas that you could take to your agency and implement. And, of course, we're happy to help in any way. So for us, we were really new to this rapid rehousing game. We had to figure it out. And what would that mean for us? So, going from an old shelter model to, this rapid rehousing program, would be to retool all our forms, adding some things in, taking things away, look at our staffing structure and really see, what was happening, because at that time, case managers were really doing everything. It was kind of stay here, fix everything, stay as long as you need to, then finally when you achieve that goal, you can leave, or you should be able to leave. And, people were entering. We had a very long wait list. About 600 people were on the wait list. So obviously, it was a very stale system. And there was very little resources going back into the community once the family were, clients were leaving. Next slide. So we retooled our structure. We redid all our 4 forms. We added just some different things. I think one of our key points were to take case managers and really focus them on housing. Instead of you come, and let us fix everything, it's that we're going to help you get back into housing and to the right fit for you, and that you'll connect into the community to different resources that'll help you stabilize then in the community. We added a housing locator, which is a person who is actually dedicated solely to the finding of those affordable housing options, and again, that right fit for that family. And actually, as a side presenter here is our housing locator, Kim Davidson, so she's here to kind of speak on this as well, or answer some questions if needed. We added also a community case manager, which now would follow people into the community so that as they were stabilizing into their new housing structure, the case manager could help, establish budgets, ongoing budgets, increase employment, work with landlords if needed. And also, we really looked at our HIMIS, ensuring that our data analysis was strong and that we could pull things to really see our trends and how we were doing. Now, the other thing that we did that really made a huge difference for us was that we had one point of entry. We established a central intake office with an assessment to ask people whether they were homeless or that if they needed to be prevented from being homeless. We assumed every call coming in regarding shelter really was, that the person was homeless. But when we started asking the right questions, there was 2 groups. Either they were homeless, literally, or we could help them prevent them from being homeless. So that was a huge eye-opening experience for us. Next slide. So creative housing. Like Stuart said, it's all about that fit, the fit for the family. And when we added the housing locator to our structure, she is the pivotal person to find those right fits for people. She solely focuses on housing. One thing that she does is people are coming into the system, into the shelter system, or who are community homeless. She does a basics to renting class to kind of talk to people about how to be a good renter, what are the obligations of a lease, really educating people on those key points, because at times we have found that, people have had several evictions and they really didn't understand what it meant to be a good renter. And really this takes it, to a different level for people so that they can understand. She explores all the affordable rental options that include shared housing or even working with private landlords. She engages landlords. She's all about recruitment. When we first started this in 2012, she hit the ground running. She has a real estate background, so Kim really went to colleagues of hers that were other real estate agents, property management companies, churches, private landlords. We were looking for landlords wherever we possibly could. Stuart mentioned that we're in a very suburban area. Northern Virginia is a very high-cost area. In Prince William County, where our facility is located, a 3-bedroom apartment or condo is around $1,900 per month. And for our families, that is not possible. So we really had to look at what types of housing could they afford? Could we help them subsidize for a period of time? Because we do utilize progressive engagement with our families, and how they could sustain themselves once in the community. We address the high barriers, that are there past evictions? What needs to be, if there's multiple past evictions, what type of landlords will we kind of target with our families to, again, make that right fit. Of course, size is always an issue as well. We had a 10-person family who had very unstable housing for a long period of time, but we were able to work with a private landlord and find a home for them, an actual, not apartment, an actual house, which was that right fit for them. Kim really ensures that not only the renter, the about-to-be renter, and the landlord understand the obligations that are happening and what kind of things they can expect from each other, but also from us as an agency, just helping with that support on either end. And of course, she ensures that Kim ensures that all the units are of livable means and are comply with fair housing. Next slide. So how did she find the landlords? I'm going to actually turn this over to Kim and talk a little bit about her work in finding landlords, because I remember many conversations with Kim during 2012 where we were really up against the wall trying to find different people who would work with our organization.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kimberly Davidson, the housing locator for Northern Virginia Family Service. I was fortunate to have a real estate career, which really assisted with the landlord recruitment on my end. I belong to several associations that are real estate and property management related, and I utilize those resources, tapping into that networking market, attempting to find property managers and landlords that will work with us. We've had a lot of great success. We also utilize the county and the city resources. Here locally, we're in the city of Manassas, but in the county of Prince William. So we're fortunate to have 3 bodies actually of government, because we have Manassas Park as well. So we tapped into those agencies who have housing choice vouchers, and they have landlords that they've worked with in the past, so we networked with them. We also were developed originally, SERVE was by several faith-based organizations, and we had a huge community support with businesses. So I utilized that aspect as well by tapping into the businesses that supported our organization, the churches in the local area that have been supporting our community, our organization here for 20 years, and was able to present them with information and literature to put in their offices, so the community as a whole could be aware of what we were trying to achieve here on our campus. We also reached out to VHDA. They have a great website that the community members in the state can utilize, and the MLS system, which is a real estate related system. And of course, good old Craigslist. We find many, many room rentals through the Craigslist system. The unfortunate part of that is it can be very tedious and very, a lot of scams actually that go on through Craigslist. So we kind of turned the table and requested our clients start placing their own ads on Craigslist, and we had much more success that way. So they would actually get, truthful correspondence from potential landlords versus scammers that came through that system. And of course, being a realtor, I also accessed any for sale by landlord, for sale by owner signs, contacting them to see if they'd be willing to work with our program, and we've had some success in that area. We're fortunate to be next to Fairfax County, which has a huge housing locator networking system. So they were kind enough to let me join their association or their network system, and we tap into that program as well. It's interesting, they're a very affluent neighborhood, and they actually relocate a lot of people into our community. So they have a lot of contacts here in Prince William where we're located. So that worked out really well for me. And now we're at the point where we really are looking outside our own community. As Gwen said, we're the average one-bedroom is a minimum of $1,100 in our community. And with our clients' incomes being, I would say, somewhere around $20,000 on the average, it's just not realistic. So we have been looking outside our community in the surrounding counties. We back up to 3 counties. We have Stafford, Fauquier, and Fairfax. Fauquier and Stafford is a little less costly than Prince William. So we've now started going into that market. We've also reached out even further west and further southeast of us to other counties as well. If we find that clients have families or perhaps can get a job transfer outside of our area, and that's what they choose to do, then we're certainly going to help them try to find housing in those communities. So we've been fortunate enough to probably relocate, I would say, up to 6 other counties in Virginia, which were more affordable than our current county. So we've had a lot of great success with rapid rehousing. And as Gwen said in the beginning, it was challenging. I've been here almost 4 years now. It was very challenging to get landlords to work with us. We just came out of a very detrimental real estate market. We were very hit very hard with foreclosures. So the current landlords that we had on hand were cautious about who they were going to put into their properties. So, but 4 years down the road, we've really developed some great relationships with landlords, with businesses, with city and county government agencies, and we now have people contacting us when they have single-family homes for rent, townhomes for rent, mobile homes for rent, and shared housing. So we really are seeing the results of all of our hard work over the last few years. And, we were skeptical, myself and the case managers, when rapid rehousing came around to being, thinking that this was going to be impossible because we're in a high-rent area. But we really, this past 6 months especially, have really seen a lot of growth. It is working for us.
And I think, for us, within our, this is Gwen again, within our program, we went from 6 to 9 months to an average of about 45 days. Next slide, Stuart. And so, really for us, as people are preparing to leave, the housing locator and the community case manager really meet with the landlord to talk about the program, the prospective landlord, I should say, talk about the program and really talk to them about the nuances of the program of, our clients, their barriers, again, what community case management is, and to ensure that everyone has an understanding, especially when those leases are about to be signed. When there's a vacancy and we get a call now, this is very different than it once was. Housing locator really works with the case managers to see who is going to be the right fit for that unit. It's all about us trying to ensure that a person has longevity in a unit and stabilizes and is no longer homeless. We still, try to get exposures with our local papers, radio, and other media to ensure that people understand our rapid rehousing program within this area. We've asked and have had real success, landlords referring colleagues. We continue to engage our faith-based groups, actually advertising in church bulletins about our rapid rehousing program and to see if anybody would want to be a landlord. We host a semi-annual landlord breakfast event where we ask our landlords to come, and we really say thank you to them. And really, even though sometimes things don't work out for a certain group in a unit, landlords will still come back and say, is there someone else that you have? And that shows real progress. And we always are saying, sending thank you notes, holiday cards, and really ask them to engage in different parts of our program, which I think has been helpful too. Next slide. So for us, we really learned that prevention is key, because it really helped us ensure that we understood the individuals that were coming into the shelter. We reduced our, our shelter stays and getting families back into the community. We don't do this alone. We really talk to our government partners, other nonprofit agencies, faith-based agencies. We're not a silo, and this is a community-wide event, this rapid rehousing. We're always looking for new streams of funding or new techniques to use within the community, right? We don't have all the answers. That's why I think these things are always great to listen to and to even beyond. Even though funding is limited, we still believe rapid rehousing is essential and can be done. Many times when our funding dries up, we are still housing people, which is a great success for us. because, you know, we're encouraging people to get out there to look for units on their own and really working with them in different ways. And, you know, we're shifting, you know, we're getting away from that homelessness structure, shifting our transitional houses into affordable rentals that clients can apply for. And we're thinking about developing more properties to make them affordable rentals in our community to serve more people. Next slide. Thanks. And this is our last slide. You know, really, our case managers are very focused now. They're actually, you know, they have the title of housing counselors. They've been housing counseling certified. That really, again, hones in on that housing and understanding people's incomes and the barriers that are maybe precluding them from getting a rental in the community. We actually we renamed our case managers to housing counselors, and we actually, through the Alliance, received a rapid rehousing certificate, which really states, you know, that we have taken our shelter stays from 6 to 9 months to 45 days or less. And that was a great honor. And last year, we served in a rapid rehousing program 600 individuals who we rapidly rehoused, or all housed, happily to say, and 276 of them were children. So, rapid rehousing works, and I turn it over to Stuart and Vivian, and thanks so much for listening to us.
Thank you, Gwen. I really appreciate that. That was a great presentation. And now I'd like to turn it over to Vivian Wan. Vivian?
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. As Stuart mentioned, I'm in Northern California, serving Alameda, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz County. So happy to talk to you and happy to hear your questions to the end. Next slide. So just like Gwen, I'll talk a little bit about how we started. We started like many homeless service providers as a shelter provider. We built a shelter. 66 folks at any point in time are in the shelter. And in about 2005, we adopted Housing First, really looking at realizing that shelter is a part of the solution, but it wasn't really ending homelessness in and of itself. So now we have over 30 housing programs, and each night we have about 1,000 households in scattered site housing through a variety of different housing programs, about a quarter of which are rapid rehousing programs. And we're pretty, we've grown a lot in our 25 years, and we have now over 20 housing specialists, and these are folks, as Gwen was mentioning, whose sole job is to find housing in the community, keep landlords happy, negotiate the relationship, problem solve when things don't work, and of course the higher end, the manager's support to help them through it. And all in all, each year we administer about $10 million worth of subsidies. Again, not all rapid rehousing, but a growing percentage of those are rapid rehousing. Next slide, please. Next slide. Not moving. Stuart. All right, so we might be having some technical difficulties here. Let's see.
Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. It sounds like we have some technical difficulty. We're going to try and resolve it as quickly as possible. Hold on just a moment. Unfortunately, we don't have hold music, but we'll be back as soon as possible. Again, I apologize for this delay. Technology is wonderful when it works. Sometimes it doesn't, however. Vivian, go
yes,
ahead. I think we're back.
Great. Can you advance the slide? Can you hear me? There you go. Yay. All right. So last year, just to give an idea of abodes served about 4,300 individuals and 5 different rapid rehousing programs. So we have programs for veterans, for singles, for folks reunifying with their children through the probation department. And as you see, about 1/5 of all the folks that we serve are in rapid rehousing programs. Next slide. Just as Gwen was mentioning, landlord and how we see things is really, for all of our housing specialists and service coordinators, there are really 2 clients, the landlord and the tenant. And it's always a balancing act with those clients. On the tenant side, we will always want to encourage what we call reality-based housing choice because our cost of living is so high here. Reasonable accommodation, and these tenants often want, to bring their 4 pit bulls and, other reasonable accommodation needs, meaning they want, an extra room for a living attendant, and then tenant rights. And then the landlord, we need to understand what the landlord cares about. Asset protection, they care about their community, both their internal community, who's in their apartment complex, also their external businesses and whatnot. And then their business needs, and really what that means in our community where there's such a high cost and low vacancy is money. They really, they need to keep their units full, and they want to get what is the going rate for their community. So we're always balancing this because, as you can imagine, depending on the funding source and the ability to pay for the households that we're putting in rapid rehousing, we might not be able to put them in a unit that is the quote-unquote going rate. So it's always a balance of what the landlord and the tenant needs. Next slide, please. So staffing structure. I want to talk a little bit about this, and I'm not going to go into the other components of the rapid rehousing, only to say that we have found it really key to have the housing specialist as a separate entity, a separate person than the case manager, if at all possible. And I really like what Gwen said. We understand that not everything will work for your communities that we use perhaps, but if at all possible, I encourage you to look at this one, because whenever we've blended a case manager and a housing specialist role, invariably the case management sort of eats away at that housing, and it makes it so that relationship with the landlord is not as valued as that relationship with the participant. And in a really tight market, that both are so essential. So, because in all that we do, relationships are key. So the housing specialist versus case manager, make sure that the roles are really clear. And I really recommend the roles that are separate. Again, there are amazing case managers that really can cultivate landlords, but find that that's really hard to balance if it's in the same person. And, I've really found that we have a lot of housing specialists. We hire a lot of housing specialists that have no housing experience, but they are exceptional salespeople. They're people that can talk to anyone, that you can trust, and that really understand the business side of housing, even if they don't have housing experience per se. When I interview those candidates, I really look at folks who are a little, what I call shiny, very, charismatic, if you will. If you could turn the page, please. So, again, we're in a high-cost area. Right, for us, an affordable unit looks like a one-bedroom of $1,400 to $1,800 a month. Of course, there are more expensive units, and apartments are only available for a few days, if that. And then, landlords are less motivated to be on top of repairs and other things. So it's a really hard market. So how we work to mitigate that is, again, we like to have specialized housing specialists that are super responsive. If a unit is open, we have to be on it, and we have to be able to close on that unit quickly. That means, work with the landlord, find a tenant, that's a good fit, and close on that unit quickly, meaning have the rent cut, the check cut, have the paper signed for our documentation. It's helpful for us also. We have housing fast funds, and these are funds that are a little more flexible to help with help tenants pay the fees that that are required for credit checks and whatnot, because sometimes those are barriers, and again, it might take the tenant 2 or 3 or 4 days to get that money together, but the unit would be gone in our area if we waited. And the other thing about high-cost areas, and this isn't exactly toting the line of NAH, but expect deeper support and upwards of 80% of rent burden, meaning that in our areas that I'm finding as the rent market tightens, I'm seeing the length of stay for rapid rehousing increase and providing deeper levels of support. And when we let go of folks, they're still paying about 80% often 80% of their income towards rent. That's uncomfortable for a lot of us. We also find that those folks are not coming back into the homeless system. So that's really important. That I often say in these presentations that my job isn't to end poverty. It's the first step of ending poverty. So get them in housing, and then they can look towards their other goals. Next slide, please. So selling point for landlords. This is how we sell it, and these are, of course, it's the relationship and the face that really makes it happen. But we guarantee rent payments. The rent check from us for the next X amount of months. Each rapid rehousing program is different. We do 3-month recertification, so we usually offer 3 months at a time. We'll tell landlords we'll give you free advertising. We can fill their vacant units without them having to do it. This, of course, works more with mom-and-pop landlords, which we find are excellent candidates for rapid rehousing. Of course, we offer the case management and housing support, that the folks that you won't be left if there's a problem, that we'll be there, and we'll be there when you need it. We sell free inspections. This is sort of a twist, because I know a lot of landlords don't like to have their units inspected, but we convince them this is a good thing, and that will help you know what it takes to keep your property maintained. And then security deposits. We don't mince over security deposits. We often have to pay double deposits, so twice the amount of rent. We expect that, and we think that's okay because landlords are taking a chance with a tenant that might not have all the income in place of staying that unit at move-in. So we make sure that we have that in place. Again, quickly. Next slide, please. These are things that we make sure that all of our housing specialists are equipped with and again, we have lots of different programs, so the answers to this vary by programs. I encourage you to look at it for your programs because these are the questions that we get almost from every landlord. How much rent can I charge? How can I charge a security deposit? Again, how much? What do you mean supportive services? Why is this person in your program? You have to dance a little bit because, again, we have specialized programs, some that have, protected disabilities and whatnot that we don't want to disclose. So we arm everyone with a very community-driven answer. How much paperwork do I have to do? What happens if the tenant doesn't pay rent? And, what is this inspection thing? What am I going to have to do with that? So make sure that you know the answers to these questions or find them, before your housing specialists or case managers, if that's the form that you use, go out, because this is what landlords are going to want to know. Other potential barriers, these are the naysayers, and again, responses, folks should be equipped with responses. The most common, of course, rental subsidy program that landlords are familiar with is Section 8, and almost every landlord has been burned by Section 8 in some way. So, we want to be careful because our housing authorities are partners of ours, so we don't want to speak poorly of Section 8, but how I sell this is typically, well, Section 8, that doesn't come with services. We actually have a service component that we can help folks if they get in trouble. Everyone has a story about a bad tenant from a previous program. Again, we try to isolate that. More and more, as the market's tightening, we're getting responses like landlords won't take third-party checks, so they'll only take checks from folks who are on the lease. And honestly, we haven't found a way to mitigate that other than to not work with corporate landlords as often, because that's a corporate response. And mom and pop landlords will actually find that a corporate check is actually more reliable. But this is a way that landlords are getting away from subsidy program. Corporate says no, same sort of thing. And then this requirement of the 3 times of the income to rent ratio. This is a hard one, again, that we avoid corporate formulas, but we encourage the landlord to use the subsidy amount that we're paying as part of the income ratio. And then we also sell the community, meaning that we live in a very high-cost area, and this is a pretty archaic rule for our area. Next slide. Stuart asked me to touch on, because Gwen works with mostly families, or at least the programs that she presented. A lot of our programs are for singles. We're an SSVS grantee, as I'm sure many on the call are as well. Other things that we look out when we are providing housing for singles and working with landlords is, is this person really single? Do they have a partner? Do they have other kids that visit on the weekend? Because the unit size needs to, we need to be reality-based with that unit size. Is an SRO, and are 3 people going to be living in an SRO? Often on the single side, what we see is that once they have a place to live, they invite their friends, a robust community of visitors over. So, we work on that on the front end, and then we encourage our landlords to be in contact with us should there be any problems, like 15 people in the unit. Substance use, we're a harm reduction agency. We don't require abstinence as part of any of our programs. However, we find it as a good question to ask tenants, particularly as we're looking into roommate situations, that if you have sort of folks who are trying to stay clean and sober and others who are not, that's probably not a great a mix of folks for the health of that unit. I had this is lessons learned, a story of 6. We housed 6 folks together. Again, we're creative. We try to do what we can. The problem is 3 of those folks were not in a place where they were actively in the recovery mode, and 3 of them were. So it created sort of a chaotic household, and ultimately we moved 3 out and made it a sort of a dry house so that it was a safe community for all. And then another was, singles just in the housing location, just, making sure that folks aren't isolated. And this is sort of tricky, particularly because we do have to move folks out of the areas sometimes. So this is, I know, blending to the case management side, but really making sure folks are connected with meaningful daily activities, because we find that the more folks are connected, the less, the fewer bad things happen in units. So we try to connect folks to make sure they're successful in housing. More about reality-based housing choice. Again, be creative. Individual leases are still the most utilized, but location is negotiated, excuse me, meaning we have a really diverse housing market, and folks might want to live in, the area that's $2,200 for a 1-bedroom, and we work with them to be a little more reality-based. Living with friends and family, but we help folks get on the formal lease and can pay subsidy when we do that. We encourage and provide the structure needed for the roommate situation, both with program participants, if they meet each other in the program or whatnot, and just with others out in the community. Renting rooms, relocation, as mentioned by Gwen, is key. And then the last thing I'd say is expect moves. Just because you move someone in to a rapid rehousing program doesn't mean that 4 months later they don't realize that, wow, it's still too expensive, they need to move again. So we always build in the capacity to move folks even within the program. So this is just more tools, programs to support moves, housing contracts for multiple options. And we need clarity on defining households, and then when and all prearranged agreements with other permanent supportive housing options, particularly in high-cost areas, could be possible after 9 months of assistance. It becomes clear that that person needs a longer-term, deeper level of support. Next slide. And that's it. I tried to fly through so that we could get to questions.
Well, terrific. Thank you very much, Vivian. A lot of great information from both Vivian and Gwen. And once again, I apologize for the technical assistance snafu we had. Just as a reminder, if you have some questions, feel free to write them into the question box. And Anna Blasco, who is here at the Alliance, and I will be going through the questions, trying to sort of combine them so we don't ask the same question 3 or 4 different times, and to make sure that we get as many as possible. I think given the technical assistance problem and that we'll probably go a little bit over the 2 o'clock Eastern time we had, but if you have some questions, now is the time to ask them. So, Anna, do you have the first question for our panelists?
Yes. So this question is for Gwen or Kim. Someone wants to know a little bit more about how you advertise, you help clients post ads on Craigslist. Do you go into detail about their situations? Do you mention that they're homeless? How does this work?
So this is Kim who's going to answer this because she is been the master of this.
Actually, when I advise the clients to keep it very simple, we don't want to give too much information, especially because of confidentiality. So we make it very basic. You know, single person or family of 3 seeking a basement rental in a particular area, the price point they want, and then I ask them always to put serious inquiries only, and if they're comfortable, their phone number. But yeah, very, very basic. And then email address. Yeah, or email address, that's correct. A very basic ad. And then when the person, and most likely it will be a serious inquiry if they're responding, can contact them and they can give them as much detail as they choose. But we don't mention anything about the program at first.
And also, we've actually, with Craigslist, and Kim did this in the beginning, is advertising for landlords. You know, that if landlords, you know, serious inquiries only, you know, we're looking for people to, you know, to make that fit for rentals, to give her a call. And Dave provided her number and also email address. But yeah, because of confidentiality, the client has to agree to that, to put up their own ad. And certainly we do, I mean, I know with the housing counselors have actually dissuaded them from giving phone numbers and just using email addresses.
Great. So maybe Gwen and Kim, you could touch on this, and then I'd like Vivian to respond. How do you talk about what your organization, you both touched on this a little bit, but could you talk more about how you talk about what your organization does and with landlords, and sort of whether or not you say that your clients are homeless, or how do you message that to landlords?
Well, this is Kim. I do not specifically say that. Now, many landlords are familiar with our organization and they may ask, but I do not offer that information. I typically just state that we've got a client that has entered into our program that's eligible for financial assistance, and then move on from there. But again, when people are familiar with the homeless shelter here in the community, they may ask. And then we had already previously, with this client, signed a consent to release, so we could release that information. But some clients do not want us to release that information, so then we do not.
And the other part about it is now that we have in our pot, it's very different than Vivian's. We have around a little bit over 300 landlords that we engage with. And by now, you know, many of those individuals, or whether they're property management or individual landlords, actually know us and we have relationships with them and actually have become donors in other ways. And so we have a very strong relationship going forward. So, and they may assume some stuff.
So for us, it's really similar because so we have about 500 active landlords that were last month we cut checks to, and throughout all of our programs. So we actually and our programs really range from sort of light and shallow to really deep, subsidized, long-term support for folks with severe and persistent mental health disabilities. So we find that explaining each program is actually not helpful at all because we want to be able to use our landlords for a variety of different programs. So we usually are, very, we appeal to what the landlord wants to talk about. A lot of landlords are really connected to veterans, right? They, this is a veteran household that's in need, looking for, a second chance, frame it like that. Again, we honor confidentiality and never disclose any sort of disability-related information, and only disclose what participants allow us to. But again, we're pretty well known in our community, so it's sort of hard to shy away from that.
Vivian, my next question is also for you. Could you talk a little bit more about the funding for your Housing Fast funds? Where did you find funding to pay for things like the security deposits and, not security deposits, the application fees and credit checks and that kind of thing?
So, and I know we've been lucky enough to garner support from general funds from 2 counties that allow that flexibility. And it's a fairly small pot. These aren't the big ticket items, really, but gosh, having a pot that you can pay $75 here and $150 here, or get rid of the old utility debt, things like that that really are small barriers to getting someone housed, has been really helpful. So yeah, because a lot of the federal funding sources, of course, we know we use HOME and SSVF and, of course, COC funds and the whole gamut. Those don't really allow for that flexibility. We've only found it in general funds. And then, although we've had some luck in foundation funds, again, $10,000 will go a really long way, but mostly general funds from counties.
Great. So we have a lot of questions about shared housing, which it sounds like both of you do. So let's talk a little bit about that. I'm going to start with Gwen and Kim. Do you want to talk a little bit about your shared housing? How does that work? Who signs the lease? How do you, what happens if one of the clients, a landlord wants to evict one of the clients?
Well, a lot of our clients are entering into shared housing, so we've been real successful in that arena. But they do have to have a minimum of a 6-month lease. If there is, I do advise the landlords up front that if there's any issues, we're available to assist and try to mediate. But if at some point they need to evict their client, then they have the right to choose to do so. We have had, this past year, we've had someone evicted, I think 2 clients evicted from shared housing. And one of them was a family of 3, and they just could not understand that, they had to follow the rules. When they enter into shared housing and the landlord lives on the premises, we go over the fact that in this particular situation, the landlord makes the rules of the home. So if they don't want any overnight guests, then it's written in the lease, and you have to abide by that. So they really had a challenge honoring that, and they were eventually evicted, even though we tried to intervene, and the case manager met with them many times. So things do occur, but yes, the landlord has the right to pursue eviction if they feel it necessary.
I think, though, this is Gwen, the thing about shared housing is that, again, certain people are identified, and start talking about with their housing counselors, in regards to shared housing. We actually have a shared housing board in the shelter where people can place an ad looking for a roommate, and that has been very successful. And we've had families partners with singles, and singles partner with singles, or families partner with other families, depending on the size of them. And so they're full leases. You know, people sign, you know, there's 2 groups of occupants on the lease, and it's, you know, a lot of it is the pre-education that Kim does before people leave and, you know, embark on housing. You know what I mean? And so that basics to renting and what it means to be a good tenant has helped us. You know, really, there's very few people that fall out.
And the other thing, this is Vivian, that we've had luck in, because landlords don't want to have to go through a timely and expensive eviction. You know, we've worked with the participant that it's not a good fit for, and we've moved them and offered the landlord someone else to put in their place that it's a good fit for. So that is a win-win-win. We find housing for someone else. The landlord doesn't have to go through eviction, and we rehouse the participant that perhaps it wasn't a good fit for, depending on the circumstances, of course.
And we do that as well. Yeah.
So we have a lot of questions about the staffing of housing location, specifically about having the housing locator and case managers be different people. So Vivian, you touched a little bit about this in your presentation. Maybe you could talk a little bit about why your organization chooses to have 2 separate roles.
Sure. You know, I think that I sort of mentioned this before, but I'm a social worker by training. I'm an MSW, you know, and ultimately the caseloads for social workers, whether you call them case managers, service coordinators, whatever, tend to be smaller, which makes that team bigger than, say, a housing specialist. So if it's just part of a service coordinator's role, invariably they'll lean back on the case management, because frankly that's how most of us were trained. We were really trained to want to work with participants, want to be great listeners, want to solve everything for people with people. It's really a different, you know, speaking to landlords and engaging, pounding the pavement in the community is something that I haven't found that most social workers really like to do. And again, social worker in the really broad sense. Again, there are exceptions. I don't want to, sometimes I get myself in trouble because, you know, if someone has in their agency someone who's amazing at both, which we have too. But, you know, we found that if a social worker is doing that role, they're frankly a little resentful for the time they don't get to spend, you know, doing case management. And they're not as skilled at it, and ultimately when there's a problem with the landlord, it's unclear on who the advocate is for the landlord and who the advocate is for the household. So we just found it immensely helpful to have those roles separated. I mean, I could talk a whole webinar on that separation, but that's sort of the nutshell.
Kim and Gwen, do you have anything to add about that?
Well, I was going to say, you know, the work really changes from, you know, being homeless to being housed, right? You know what I mean? So, you know, when we look at what that means and what kind of, you know, we're getting ready. As people are still homeless, you know, we're still working on those stabilization skills, right? You know, looking at their income, you know, talking to them about what that fit is for the rent. They're really in a crisis position at that point because they're in the homeless crisis. So the work now, you know, changes because now they're a bit more stabilized. I mean, it's still a bit of a crisis, right, because they're getting used to their new environment and, you know, building relationships in the community. But then the work within the community case manager is really about stabilization, you know, complete stabilization and, you know, connecting to resources and, you know, being that mediator between landlord and tenant if needed and, you know, kind of looking towards the future. So I think the work is very different as well. And we also did it for a while where the case managers were doing some community case management, and it was just too different of a shift for them. You know, it was one thing to have them, you know, to change the focus and have them focus on housing only and, you know, getting people ready for housing versus doing everything. But then following cases in the community, it was very clunky, and it didn't work for us either. and landlords felt not supported. And again, given the amount of caseload, that the case managers really had, and then the caseloads in the community, it was, clients were left hanging. And so it was a much better fit to position one person and actually two people, housing locator and community case manager, kind of position them, with the eyes in the community.
So I just want to say at this point that we're almost at 2 o'clock, but we're going to keep answering some questions for a couple minutes longer, as long as our panelists can stay on the line. So Gwen, and then I'll bounce this back to Vivian. Could we talk a little bit about helping landlords rent to clients who have bad credit or maybe a criminal background? How do you house tenants that have a lot of barriers?
Right, and I think a majority of our clients are the highest barrier. Once we change the assessment of people coming in the front door, we have the literally homeless, highest barrier individuals coming into shelter, and that Kim works in the community homeless as well, who are not in shelter. And we see people who have multiple evictions, very low wages, very large families, very bad debt, and also criminal histories. And so, that really begins, that question becomes the right fit of the rental option for them. And it might not be a property management company. It might not be traditional. It might be more non-traditional. It might be shared housing. And it might also include a private landlord and somebody that we have a relationship with. And, increasing the community case management so that the person has extra supports in the community, so that failure becomes less of an option. And so that, and oftentimes it's hard for clients, because they all have an ideal of what they want versus maybe what is the reality of the situation. In Vivian's program, they have, it appears that they have a very large funding stream, where we really don't, And so we really have to look at, what kind of rental subsidy we can go forward with, what they can bring to the table, and really who would be willing to work with them. And a lot of them are private landlords who take on some of our heaviest, highest barriers and have been quite successful at it too.
And I just wanted to speak on that. What I find that especially when it comes to criminal history, we've got several landlords that really just want to sit down with the client and talk to them, interview them in depth about what has occurred in the past and how the relationship might work moving forward. And, if the client's agreeable to doing that, we've had some great success where they just speak, sit down between the two of them and have a heart-to-heart conversation, and then the landlord ends up renting to them with, of course, with the support of our organization. But we have had great success in that direction.
Yeah, I don't know how much more I have to add other than it can work. Really, the biggest barrier that we find is around income. It's much easier to sell someone even with a criminal background, that has income now, because you sort of can tell the story of where they were and where they are now. For us, it's much harder to get someone with zero income into housing, and we do that all the time. With a promise of a future income to support it. But we have a reentry program that specifically works with folks coming back from the criminal justice system, and we actually have landlords that ask for those folks in their buildings, because they find that there's a perception that they protect their buildings. So they've had such a good experience that folks coming out of the criminal justice system, they say, I'm not going to be that guy anymore, and I'm going to make sure none of my neighbors are either. So we've sort of turned it around, which is, we haven't really, the participants who have done amazing jobs, they've turned it around for us, so that's great.
So Vivian, I have a question for you about when you need to pay 80% of a client's funds or they have an 80% cost burden. How do you talk to landlords about sustainability in that unit?
So on the front end, we don't talk about the 80%. We talk about they are looking to increase their income, and until we'll be able to help for a certain amount of time while they work to do that. Ultimately, the lease is between the landlord and the tenant, and California has pretty good tenancy right protections. So once a tenant is in, they fight really hard to keep the housing and pay their rent, whether they're paying all of it or not. How we talk to landlords when we let go, at least on the financial assistance, we say, we'll still be in contact with them should they get in trouble. They're connected to other sources as well. We make sure they're connected to, all the food programs and whatnot, so they're using as little of their disposable income towards other things other than rent. And we, again, we sort of live in a high-cost area, so it's unfortunately not that uncommon. And we talk about the fact that that folks, for the most part, 95% of them succeed in housing. And this is the first step, and they're still increasing their income. So this is a point in time. Right now it's 80%, but next year we hope it's 50%. And the year after that we hope it's closer to 40%. But 30% isn't reality anymore.
So starting with Vivian, could you give us a concept of, you have like 20-something housing locators. How many clients are on each of their quote-unquote caseloads? And then for your case managers, how large are their caseloads? And then I'd like Gwen to respond to the same question.
Sure. So for ours, it really depends on what type of housing program. For a rapid rehousing program, on housing locators' caseload is about 30. And again, that's a different case manager follows them. Really, the housing specialist finds the unit, maintains a relationship with the landlords, and is there should problems occur, but they're not doing the day-to-day case management. So 30, upwards of 40 sometimes, depends on the program. On the case management side, it's 20 to 30, again, depending on the program. So it's a pretty light touch case management approach for our rapid rehousing clients.
And so for us, we're in a shelter, so case managers can go up to about 15 cases. They kind of max out around that, heads of household. And Kim is working with all of those heads of household pretty much. So that would be 30-some individuals at any given time, plus some community people that she assists with. And so once those individuals are out and housed, the community case manager takes over. So she maxes out on her caseload at a given around 25 to 30. Again, rotating. These are all rotating numbers at any given time. It's hard to say what current things look like, because once people are in the community, some people will disengage with us and won't want to engage anymore, and will do things their own way, which is, of course, their right. And so, it's always kind of the balancing act of how many people, are getting ready to be housed and how many people have achieved some self-sufficiency as well. So people can be moved off of her caseload and are good to go. And, we do find that people sometimes just need a month or two of assistance from us, and really, we can check in with them and everything's doing fine versus, more intensive work.
The other thing that we've become better at is assuming that households can find housing on their own, because again, before we sort of took that social work, mentality of we need to help them, So now we sort of say, hey, you go finding housing your own, and that means if they're in our shelter, they're going to get out of our shelter more quickly. They're going to get into housing more quickly. So we have the individuals do a lot of the legwork on their own, and then the housing specialists really assist the folks who, have been trying that for a little while and haven't quite figured it, haven't found something, or the folks with the 3 evictions and the criminal background. Those folks that are going to need more of the heavier touch.
Great. So this next question is for Kim, I think. Can you talk a little bit more about how you work with the faith community and churches to find landlords?
Well, we are really we're really fortunate to have a lot of volunteers here at our facility from faith-based organizations. So from my perspective, when I first started working, I would go and visit the churches, and that took a lot of time. So now I approach people on campus. We have a food pantry here, and of course, all of our administrative staff really are volunteers. So I typically just notify them when I need housing, see if they can pass on the word to anybody at their church, or if they can advertise in their bulletin for us. So it's really been beneficial to have local volunteers.
Great. And Vivian, do you have anything to add about talking to churches of the faith community for landlords?
Yeah, you know, we've had actually some mixed outcomes, you know, with that. So our faith community are huge sort of financial supporters of Abode, and again, sort of we've found that keeping the business centers separate has been helpful, because once they enter into a landlord relationship, that relationship with us changes, you know, because they have to do some things as landlords, and it's our job to sort of make them do those things as landlords, you know, and we'll hold up our end of the bargain. But it muddles that donor agency relationship a little bit. So so I tread lightly if an existing donor, and I just say this because we were built as a faith-based agency like so many others, and so much of our core support is still in the faith community. So we're just careful to honor the relationship as it first appeared. You know, because again, you know, on the landlord side, we sort of appeal to business needs, and it could be our area is a little bit different, but the violin strings don't work as well in our landlords anymore, because they can get so much money in the community. So so we don't have as much luck with our faith community. I'd like to say different, but it's not.
And if I could just interject, you're absolutely right, Vivian. I know when I first started going to the churches and meeting with pastors, it's very different. Meeting with a pastor who does donate to our organization versus just a member of a church who's volunteering. So I find that just the members of the church that volunteer at our facility are much more receptive to helping us in that manner as far as securing landlords. You know, if they know of anyone who's renting out a room or a house, contacting me, versus the pastors that are donors, financial donors to our organization.
So thank you so much for everyone for staying on. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll end the webinar. So whoever of our presenters would like to respond, if you could talk a little bit about how you respond to landlord concerns about fair housing issues.
And I'm not sure, the fair housing issues, you mean how do I skip my wait list, or what do you mean?
A lot of, I believe that, you know, a lot of landlords feel like they can't participate in something like rapid rehousing because of fair housing issues. And we actually have, if you have any suggestions, a number of participants would like to know if you have any resources on how they can understand fair housing laws better, because they've, this is a common concern that landlords have in working with rapid rehousing programs.
You want to take that, Gwen?
Well, Gwen stepped out, but this is Kimberly. You know, each state has their own, you know, fair housing, and there's federal fair housing. So I attend a fair housing class every year with our community here. And thankfully, we have our own, Virginia has their own fair housing department. So when I have questions, I call down there and inquire, because it can be challenging to read the Landlord Tenant Act and understand what it says. But, you know, I send information to my landlords. If they're an LLC, they typically know all about fair housing. If they're property management or apartment complex, they know all about fair housing. But private landlords don't typically. So I send them literature on fair housing. If I have to print out or email them the Landlord Tenant Act, then I do that. Or if I just send them some literature on fair housing, I do that. If they live on the premises, then that's a different story. They have the right to make certain choices about who lives with them. So it's just about sending them information, I think, when it comes to fair housing.
Great.
Right.
Oh, go ahead, Vivian. I'm sorry.
Right, and so we've done the same thing. Honestly, we haven't found it to be as much of an issue. We're sort of on the other end of it, meaning that we find that by not taking subsidies, they're sort of on that line of, you know, fair housing. And, you know, it's a choice whether to sort of fight against them or not into letting folks in. But, you know, we sort of toed the same line. Like, look, if you treat people, you know, fairly and equally, and, you know, with our program we supplement their income, and if you count that, and you can count that for anyone, then you're not in violation of any fair housing. And so, and we provide all the same information around fair housing as well, but we haven't found it to be a huge issue for rapid rehousing for market rate units, at least.
Yeah, I have had, just recently I had a gentleman make a comment, a crude comment to me, and you know, we opted not to work with him. So, and I had to tell him, you know, I said, you know, sir, you can't, this is not the proper way to speak to someone, about someone, et cetera, et cetera. And we just opted not to work with that particular landlord.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Gwen and Kim and Vivian and Anna for handling all the questions. We had, I think, probably 60 or 70 questions that came in. We obviously didn't get a chance to get to all of them, but what I can promise you is that we will be taking a look at them, and we have plans for a rapid rehousing webinar every month, so there will be a lot of opportunities in the future for us to address your questions, perhaps even in a webinar of its own. Just to let you know, there are on our website the core components. There's also a longer document that goes into more detail about rapid rehousing, the history, and a little bit more detail in the core components. You can find them at the links above on the slide, or you can just certainly go to our primary webpage, endhomelessness.org, and find the rapid rehousing link, and there's a lot of information available there. Just want to remind you that we have 2 upcoming webinars, core components, rent and move-in assistance, the financial side of things, and that's going to be on January 13th at 1 p.m. And I know there were a lot of questions about the case management side that we really aren't addressing so much today, but we will be devoting an entire webinar on February 10th to handle and address rapid rehousing case management and services. And also just want to put a plug for our upcoming conference. Our national conference on ending family and youth homelessness will be in San Diego on February 19th through 20th. So that's it. Here's the contact information for everyone, and I want to again thank you all. This webinar is going to be recorded. We will post it on our website, and the slides and the webinar will be available there. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day, and very happy holidays.